Alright, today we're going to be tying a kind of a version of the classic pheasant tail. This is one that was introduced to me by some friends from Poland. So we're going to start with a long shaped nymph hook. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a bead, a little bit of lead wire to give it a little bit of extra ability to sink down quickly. Got a couple of turns of lead wire. This way we can do this and we can fish it without having to put any split shot onto our gear. Tie this in, sink that right up to the bead, and then lock it in with a little bit of thread. So lock that in. We'll go over this really quick. Make sure that we get a good tapered body, do a little bit of thread work to make sure that it doesn't bunch up too much. So next thing we're going to add in is just a little bit of pheasant tail. We're going to take this right off the quill, keep the tail fairly thin, right off the tail, and we're just going to hide stack this and pull it off. I'm going to keep the tail relatively short, maybe about half the length of the shank to 3/4 the length of the shank of the hook. A little pinch wrap. Tie that in. And then we're going to trim this just before that slope up to where we tied in that lead wire. And the next thing we're going to tie in, I just had it here, is a little bit of monofilament, 4 or 5x, just to give this fly a little bit of rigidity and strength and durability. We're going to tie that in, and then a little bit of orange or pink or green floss. And what we're going to do is just create a little hot spot right back here at the back of the hook. We see these a lot up front, but not really in the back, and then advance that thread forward. A couple of wraps with this good colored floss to give a little bit of hot spot in the back end. Come off, tie that off. And then what we're going to do is underlie this through the body so that it stays in place and it doesn't come undone as we fish this fly. Trim off that floss now that we got a little hot spot. Advance our fly back, our thread back a little bit. Take a little bit more pheasant tail to create the body. Tie that in at the tips, pull it back just a bit. We're going to advance this back just to about the point where we tied in that hot spot. Tie that all down. And then wrap it forward. Tie it up to the bead and then tie it off. A couple of wraps there. We'll trim the pheasant tail. And then we're going to take this mono and we're going to counter wrap it. Wrap it the opposite direction that we wrap that pheasant tail to give it that strength and rigidity. And then one little trick we do with monofilament is instead of just tying it down, we actually wrap the monofilament around, the thread around the monofilament to tie it down and lock it in so it doesn't move. That monofilament's very slick and has a tendency to come undone. So right there, and then the last thing we want to do is add a little bit of a collar. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of natural hare's ear dubbing mixed with some really fine crystal flash to give it a little bit of sparkle. We're going to come in, take our dubbing wax, a little bit of dubbing wax on here for this to adhere, and then we're going to just very simply and very sparsely wrap in some of this dubbing. We want to do this really loose so it kind of bugs out and gives us that little leggy appearance. We'll start small, and if we need to add more later, we will. And then just a couple of simple wraps right behind the bead. Pull that back. whip finish right behind the bead of the. I have a tendency to do 2 whip finishes because I am not a big fan of glue, and this tends to work just as well. And there you go, very simple pheasant tail in kind of a European flair. This is the Polish pheasant tail.